Hi, I'm Helen Griffin, and I have the Golden Apple blog and the Golden Apple website. My Golden Apple website features a number of different videos, especially for cast-ons, and I collect cast-ons. Recently I came across somebody who shared on Ravelry a number of different cast-ons that are common in China, and of course I wanted to explore them immediately. What I have before you is two versions of the cast-on. This is the Chinese version of a long-tail cast-on in Knit and Purl, and this is a standard long-tail cast-on in Knit and Purl. If you examine them very, very closely, there is some differences, but the differences are very subtle, and I'm going to show you both versions. You can decide for yourself which one you want to use. So let me put this aside and take some yarn, and create a tail here so that we have a tail, just like a standard long tail. We're going to put a loop in it to start. Okay, this works best with a loop. Some long tails do, some long tails don't. And this loop represents a standard long tail stitch. Now, the Chinese version of long tail, the American version of long tail, or at least the slingshot version of long tail, which is the one I do, versus the thumb version, has you set up your hand like this. You put your needle in, and you get what I like to call the ceremonial loop, the kind of ribbon loop that are used for so many causes. And that is basically a simple cast-on stitch. Please notice that the yarn end, this is the thumb, so the tail end is in the front half of the loop. That's how we do it. Now, now I'm going to go on to the Chinese cast-on. I'm going to show you the Chinese cast-on first. I presume you know how to do a cast-on stitch or a long tail cast-on stitch. I'm going to go slow, but if you don't know long tail at all, you might find it difficult. So we set up as if we were going to a standard long tail, only we reposition the yarn. So the reposition yarn is like this. And because this is our first standard long tail stitch, or our purl, we're going to next do the alternating knit stitch that comes with this cast on. To do this, we're going to go under this strand of yarn, this top strand of yarn that's closest to the previous stitch, go under it, pick up the stitch from the index finger, and come back to our sort of slingshot position, and you'll see that we've cast on a knit stitch. For the Chinese cast on, you go into the loop this way, and now you'll notice, I'm going to take a moment to show you, that in this loop, which is a simple cast on stitch, the yarn is in the back, not in the front. This makes a very, very, very subtle difference in the stitch. So once we pick up this loop, we pick up a stitch and complete our cast on. Now the next time I do it, I'm not going to stop, and you'll see a much smoother motion. So our hand is positioned with the yarn coming from the last stitch, between the thumb and index finger, around the thumb, and then into the palm. We're going to now make a standard long tail. There's our twisted loop. Pick up a stitch, tighten up the thumb stitch, reposition. So now we do the under the yarn closest to the needle, pick up a stitch, and make a knit stitch. Into the loop, just as you would for a standard long tail, pick up a stitch, snug it up, make a knit stitch. Into the loop. So the primary difference between the Chinese version of long tail and the Western version of long tail, I'm going to say Western because it's used in a number of different countries, is how the simple stitch is made. So that's the main difference. Now, the second difference between this cast on and a normal long tail cast on is this cast on is alternating knit stitches with standard long tail stitches or purl stitches, a knit stitch, a long tail stitch, which equals a purl, a knit stitch. So that is how we do the Chinese long tail. But if you like this effect and are not concerned about the subtle difference that is made by how the slip or simple cast on stitch is made, we can do this cast on as a standard long tail. So I'm going to reposition the yarn so that I realized I've been doing a standard long tail. So this is a standard long tail, this is the Chinese long tail, and the Chinese long tail, you go in this way, so you still go into the loop, pick up the stitch, knit, pick up the simple, pick up the stitch so that the cross is in front, snug up the stitch, make the knit one, pick up the stitch, crosses in front, make the knit stitch, pick up the stitch so the cross is in front, and make the knit stitch, pick up the stitch so the cross is in front. So as I say, now if you've done a simple cast on ever, you know that there's a simple cast on and then there's the reverse simple cast on, and that the difference between those two is very, very subtle. The difference would be equal to the difference between the open loop cast on and a standard cast on. It is a very slight difference in the position of the purl yarn, but it is so difficult to see that I think only somebody who's an expert would know the difference. So what is unique and special about this cast on is the alternating knit stitches, which I think is a wonderful idea. I love 1x1 ribbing. Of course, if you don't like 1x1 ribbing, it's probably not as helpful to you because you cannot make this into 2x2 ribbing, though you could make it into 2x1. The problem is, no matter how you hold the yarn, whether you hold it in a standard, in the open loop, the reverse loop, Chinese style, or the standard American. This is the standard American, this is the Chinese. What happens is once you've made that stitch and then you go to make this stitch, you can't make this stitch twice. You can't go and make it again. Well, because what you see is you get a yarn over and you don't get an extra stitch. So you can only make one of those knit stitches. You could do as many of the standard sort of long tail stitch, whether you do the Western hold or the Chinese hold. Doesn't really matter. What matters is you can only get one knit stitch. So you could do 2 long tail stitches and then 1 knit, but you can't do 2 knits. So it is limited primarily to working with 1x1 ribbing. And let's go back to our sample. The sample for the 1x1 ribbing is kind of attractive. I think it's very nice how the knit starts right at the bottom. It is a very, very stretchy cast on. It opens up an awful lot, so it's very useful for ribbing, especially if you wanted to do some really tight ribbing on a small needle for your yarn, for something like mittens or a cuff of a warm sweater. It would be a very attractive edge, I think, for a cuff, or a very attractive edge for a hat, and at the same time a very stretchy edge. So it is a very useful cast on to do. But I think that how you recreate the basic long tail stitch, whether you wrap it in the Chinese style, which is reversed to the Western style, or if you wrap it in the Western style as opposed to the Chinese style, I don't see that as making very much difference. As I say, I really can't see the difference between this knit down here, oops, and this knit down here. I just don't see the difference. And the same is true on the other side. On the other side, I don't see a difference between this one, oops, I've taken the needle out obviously, and this one. I think that they look virtually identical. I think they are not identical, and I think that somebody could see the difference if they pursued it. But I think the difference is so subtle, it really doesn't make any difference.